Hi there, this is the final part of my tribute to the history of the Amiga, and in this part it looks like it was meant to be tagged on to the rest. Well, it originally was, but I realised I had too much time left at the end of the video, so I tagged on a few more things as well, things that I really wanted to know about, like the Microsoft story where all that got started with the MSX, which turned into the MSX blocks. And I really wanted to know about the Sega Master System, which wasn't even the Master System, it was the Sega Mark III. So I wanted to finish off those systems, but you might wonder why I branch off and show all these irrelevant systems to the Amiga. Surely the Amiga was head and shoulders above everything at that time, except for the workstations, which cost a fortune. Well, I really wanted to cover the lot, because nobody else had really done that before, and I wanted to present this like a virtual tour of a virtual history museum of computing history. So imagine for a moment that you walk into the world's largest museum. Maybe it's on the top of Mountain View in California, but you walk through those doors and someone greets you at the door and says, I will take you through a guided tour of everything. I will take you through everything that's ever been made in 4 hours. And so you agree, you start the interview, so you go down to the basement, and in the basement there is the Atari and all the old stuff, and it goes from the Ampex stuff into the Atari stuff, and it's comic up machines, and then you go up a few levels and you check out a few more things. Atari leads naturally onto Commodore, and Commodore leads onto Apple, and Apple leads onto IBM, and IBM basically took over the market. So you go up and down a few floors and you discover a little bit about Apple and Atari, and then it goes back up to Commodore, and then it goes down to the basement again for another section on Atari. And don't forget, we haven't left Atari from the beginning of the story all the way through to the end. Atari are there, and the Atari ST is just about to be launched in our story. And there are lots of peripheral stories I could have told and all that, but I chose to leave those off the table, basically because they would be too long to tell the fact that Microsoft never got a penny from Commodore Basic, and Commodore Basic, which was bundled with the VIC-2 and the Commodore 64, well, Jack did a shady deal and he bought Microsoft Basic, lock, stock and barrel, and for the VIC and for the 64 he renamed that to version 2, and Microsoft never got a penny off it, despite the Commodore being the biggest selling computer of the 1980s. So that's a fact. Thank you Turkinex for reminding me of that fact. So yes, this goes up and down a few floors, and if you can imagine this almost like a spiral, starting at one end with Ampex, and maybe at this end with Ampex, and it spirals out to take care of all the other computers and all the wide field, and then it comes back down to Apple and IBM and Atari and Amiga, because by 1985 those were the guys that were left, and those guys pioneered then the future, which led on to the likes of the Sega Master System, and from there the Sega Genesis, and from there all the other machines. And the Super Nintendo and everything else, well, they cloned arcade technology, but the Amiga tried to get there before everybody else. It was a jack of all trades, it didn't quite succeed, but it tried to get there. But people think of the Amiga about the games, and I wanted this to be not a games documentary, but a hardware, an Amiga flavoured documentary. And originally I thought, like the Spectrum show, why not introduce this at launch in 1985? And then I realised that there was a whole can of worms that happened before the launch, and that's what happened to make this documentary. And some of these things you might know already, some of these things were absolutely brand new to me, and so I had to throw those in there while I'm covering these on my Amiga channel, and just throw those out there to all the nerds out there who may be interested in those machines. So the Top Trumps thing led from the amazing Amiga all the way back down to the Altair, and all the stats in between, and the Los Gatos team moving to Los Gatos. When I found that on the map, that led to all the maps. And in the next part, part 2 of the saga, we will begin from 1985 but it won't be anything like part 1. You'll be very glad to know. It will be focused on sections and segments and features about this and about that, and it won't go too much into the history timeline. It will be based on years, 1986, all of this happened, but we'll be looking at features instead of features on Atari and Apple and Intel. We'll be then looking at features on the developers, maybe Accolade, Electronic Arts, all the developers in Silicon Valley that started up around that time, and all those great developers which pioneered things on the Amiga, and we'll be looking at individual things like that, but not always the software. I'll be looking at the dawn of the Amiga magazines when that comes out. We'll be looking at the dawn of the Amiga hardware and the dawn of the Amiga 3D. But in the next part, I really want to get onto the Amiga Ranger project, which nobody really wants to talk about in any of these documentaries. And then from that, the building of the Amiga 500 and the release of the 500 and the 1200, and how all of those came about, and what happened to the original team. And, well, I found out some of those stories, but I'm going to have to inquire a bit more to find out what happened to the rest. But eventually, all the Amiga team broke up from the classic Amiga photograph, and they disappeared and went their separate ways. Fortunately, a few hung around with Commodore as well, but by the most part they got rid of those. So we'll be seeing the last threads of the Amiga crew, hence the title picture with the Amiga crew and the classic Amiga Tick logo on there. And where did the Amiga Tick logo come from? Well, maybe I'll be covering that in the next part, but just to mention it, of course, it's the Commodore logo that they've always used, the rainbow. You may see that on the Commodore Plus 4 machine and the TED computers, and the rainbow also appeared on the Commodore 64, and well, it found its way over to the Amiga and the VIC-20 and all those kinds of machines. They all had the rainbow, so they made it a tick because it was Jack's famous thing that he used to say. It's Trammell, Jack Trammell, standing for done well. And so they used the Trammell done well thing and created a tick, and they planted that on the Amiga. Before then, the Amiga crew had been using the boing ball symbol as their logo, and they planted the boing ball symbol on various bits and pieces. It was never an official logo, and then when Commodore took over, of course, the tick took over until quite late into development, and then it went back to the boing ball. So that's where the tick comes from. When Commodore took over, they brought the logo with them, and they kind of diverted the red Amiga tick, the heartbeat, which of course J. Miner had saved countless lives with his pacemakers. They changed the heartbeat and the oscilloscope from Amiga image, and they changed the font to the classic Amiga font, Garamond I think it is, and they italicked it and created the Amiga image. You'll see the original Commodore logo printed on the front cover of the Velvet machine, which again I didn't know the Velvet machine even existed before this. So the Commodore as it was without the Amiga, and so they invented that a little bit later. The Velvet machine is a machine unto itself with a separate power switch on one side, and it's an Amiga, but it's not quite the Amiga, and they released that quite late into the Amiga's development. So only a few Velvet systems are known to exist, but if you are an emulator user, then you get to emulate the Velvet because that's part of WinUAE, and maybe the other packages as well. And you may notice that Amiga Forever is advertised in this by Amiga Forever, and I'm not connected with any of these guys, but if you want the ROMs, I had a question only yesterday. Where do I emulate the Amiga on my X machine, my Mac, my PC? Well, Amiga Forever. You get the ROMs and everything's supposed to work out of the box. If you use WinUAE or FSUAE, well, sometimes it works out of the box, sometimes not, but WinUAE definitely is for the guys that like to lift up the hood and tinker around and to get all kinds of configurations going, and even then you still won't have the ROMs, so unless you have an original Amiga to rip the ROMs, and still that won't be illegal, so just buy Amiga Forever. So that's why that's in there. I'm not affiliated with those guys, but that's a free link, and if anybody asks me where can you actually emulate the Amiga on a PC on Mac, I will tell them Amiga Forever, because that's the way, and that's not the way I do it, because I ripped the ROMs off my original 1200, but I certainly recommend that software, and you get DVD quality material and hidden documentaries as well. So I include that. So I hope you get what's coming up next. It's going to be 100% and 90% Amiga in the next documentaries, but for this one I wanted to do the documentary that nobody could make, and that's to include every other machine in the whole cooking pot and stir that up. And like I say, walk around a virtual computer history museum and look at all the cards, lift up all the machines, find out who made those, the people, where they made those, the places, and find out a little bit of info as well, what they had inside them, what they went on to do, and what they influenced as well. So that's basically what we do in this documentary, and not that I'll be featuring Nintendo in any further documentaries apart from the Super Nintendo, which came out a little bit later, but we'll finish off the Nintendo story in this one, and I hope that finishes off that chapter, because the whole point of this is to finish off about Microsoft, because we don't really need to know about those anymore until Windows 95 and maybe even 3.1 came out. We don't need to know any more about IBM or Intel. We certainly don't need to know about Apple or the Mac, because the Mac just carried on being the Mac. And so all those machines that I'm talking about do not bear much significance to the Amiga. Remember, when the Amiga came out, the Mac had no colours and no sound, and the PC had 4 colours and a beeper. So the Amiga was amazing, head and shoulders above everything when it came out, even though 4 channels sounds like nothing today, when the other computers out there had mono channels. Maybe 3-channel mono was the standard, or sometimes even not even that. Then the Amiga was a massive step forward in a very short space of time. So you'd be glad to know, yet again, we'll be looking at what makes the Amiga. Everything about the Amiga, the disk drive, the drive click, the guru meditation, the colour, the beige, the icons, the workbench, the mouse, everything which makes the Amiga, everything. And that will take some time to tell. That will be in the next part, which I'll be glad to tell during the Amiga 500 period. And there are lots and lots and lots of things, in fact everything which makes the Amiga, including the chipset. It's very easy to understand how that works, so let's describe that in the next part. Make it a little bit more technical, but let's try to keep this one factual. And that's why there isn't much of my perspective in this. Before all this kicked off, I messaged Kid Justice and he said, don't worry about putting your perspective out there, it's just your perspective. And I think I replied back saying, yeah, but I don't really want any of my perspective in there, this is just history. And I've always been hysterical about history and geography, and also, you know, I'm beginning to sound like the Joker, and also electronics. And so we put all those together. I'm by no means a natural videographer. I've had to work very hard on this for very long hours, and what people come up with in seconds I take days and weeks to work over, and it's still not right, because I'm still finding bugs in the thing even now, which are annoying. But luckily these 4 videos which you see now are acting like the beta versions, because you guys are telling me what's wrong with those, and so hopefully I'll be able to release a full version at some point next year. But the main focus of next year for now is to get on with the play guides, and I have recorded all of that footage and I have edited all of that footage. I just have to narrate it, and then we'll see where we go. And the next plan right now is to launch a brand new Kickstarter for the next set of films, but I feel that this is completely the wrong time to do that. So what I'm about to do and launch instead is to try the Patreon idea, just like Matt Chat. I'm hoping that 1 or 2 people will help me fund the play guides, and when money comes in for the play guides, I will give you the documentary for free. And so I'm hoping that one will fund the other, and so we'll see how that goes. If it's not really taking off by April or May, then we'll try and do an all singing, all dancing Kickstarter for the Amiga documentary that you wanted about the Amiga, and about all those flipping discs. And for that I'm going to need to buy a real Amiga, and I'm going to have to buy the hardware to rip from the real Amiga, and a 1080p camera, and XYZ, all the magazines, which cost between 12 and £15, and that's going to cost a heck of a lot of money. I don't have that money, I didn't want to go down the Patreon route, but I'm going to produce some quality shows for you guys, and I'm going to see if I can't work through this and get through to the next part, and hopefully work on that dream, because that's what my life for the past 18 months has been all about. And being a reviewer of Amiga games was the very one thing that I always wanted to do. Specifically, Amiga games. If I could get paid for doing that and make that my life's work, then I'd be doing that absolutely 25 hours a day. And I absolutely have been working on this for quite some time, quite late hours in the day. I did manage to break off 1 o'clock in the morning, but anyway. So that's been my life. I'm not going to be remembered for much, but this is it. So I'm hoping that through the play guides that you'll love, then I'll create some stuff for you, and you can hopefully maybe tip a few bob, as they say in Lancashire, tip a few quarters in the old hat as a tip jar every now and again, and hopefully if people do that, then all of that money will go towards that equipment that I need, a new graphics card, a second, well, a third monitor, so I can view on one screen and read the script on another. That would be paradise, wouldn't it? But we're going to have to save all those for the future. And so this is, and just turn this thing around, that's better. That's the final edit of the final episode of the show, and I'm trying to keep my voice somewhere near the same level, and then you can actually hear it. I don't have to endlessly volume balance it, and you can see quite some marks there. You can see quite some layers as we go up and down to the cellar and up to the attic. Let's try to zoom in on some of these areas, and whoops, well, it's quite a long puzzle. You can see those, that's the last map area that I'm over at the moment, and the last map, well, you can see that on the other screen, and that takes quite a few dots, and these are the individual screen breakdowns from all of those stats screens, what I like to call the top trumps screens. And you can see those are all individual. So I had to actually, well, the Scala part is on the original Amiga, and I translated all of that bit by bit onto what would become the final effect. And all of these graphics, well, all these fonts that you can see right now actually came from, well, as far as I could get it, the original Scala demo. And I cloned that, clone for clone, onto a PC. So that's how I did those, bit by bit. And yes, this thing is quite large, with quite some things going on, with things piled on top of each other. Now at the moment, as I speak, this video is banned in all countries around the world. And I'll, if I can, get to that part. Here we are. This is the part which is being banned, not the part about from bedrooms to billions Amiga years. In fact, I'll just take that caption off the screen. No, it's the fact that I'm using an Apple theme from the Ghostbusters theme, which is not by Ray Parker Jr., that was covered by someone else. And because that theme appears right at the end of this movie, it's been banned worldwide. So it would be launched at midnight tonight, or midnight on the day of launch, but unfortunately I've had to wager a copyright claim on that, and so it won't get launched, or it won't appear until that has been cleared up. And if that doesn't get cleared up, well, I'm going to have to somehow fix that or mute that part of the video. And that would be a shame, given that that's a cover and not actually the real song. So that is basically the making, finally, of this epic, and all the different segments of this epic. Turn on all the purple areas are my commentaries, so all those have been volume balanced. And I noticed in part 3 the volume wasn't amazing, it seemed to get louder as we go on, but anyway, there are literally thousands of those segments which make up the entire thing. And I go on about the volume balancing. I'm 99% happy with the picture, and I'm 98% happy with the music. It's just that if I didn't spend 3 hours volume balancing every play guide, then they wouldn't sound anywhere near as good. And I spent weeks volume balancing this and taking out all the clicks and pops and squeaks and bikes and foghorns and sirens and everything else that was in there to make it sound reasonable, and that's why it does sound reasonable. So I am a perfectionist, but then I want this to be a legacy. I want people to walk around this museum and find out where the Amiga came from as they see the Amiga during every looking over the passageway, and through every door they will look over the shoulder and find the Amiga. So that's my tour of history over with, and so that's basically it. Thanks for everybody who's found this amazing and interesting. I've certainly found it all interesting, and I didn't even know about this stuff before I even started this. So thank you, and I hope to see you again for the Play Guide series starting very soon. Thank you.